Now, this next step, I'm going to hold down the Option key and I'm going to make a clone copy of that. And let's just call that WC size. And I'm just going to hide that. It just makes total sense to get in the habit until you get your final version that the client has approved, or your boss, or you yourself like. Before you basically start getting into deep, it makes total sense to start making duplicate layers of your layer by holding down the Option key or dragging it down here and naming the layers appropriately. Okay, now I'm going to share with you a very powerful technique for creating a shadow. We want to cast the shadow into the distance, similar to the shadows that are already on the beach. Now I want to share with you that if I double click my layer, I have layer styles, and I do have something called drop shadow. Now unfortunately this drop shadow, even though I can manipulate the drop shadow, now I want to take this one step at a time. Okay, I'm going to cancel this for a second. This can be very confusing and very frustrating, so I just want to share this technique with you so you don't get frustrated and excited. Well, actually, excited's fine, but frustrated's not. I'm going to double click here. So let's say you want to get this a drop shadow, so you're going to say, okay, based on these choices, I'm going to click drop shadow. So I click drop shadow, and then I want to change the settings for my drop shadow, and I'm going, well, where's my, will this affect it? I don't know. No, that's not affecting it. Is it here? No, I'm not sure what this means. I'm totally confused here as I have drop shadow checked here, but I'm not seeing my choices for my drop shadow. So I'm getting very frustrated here as to why I can't change my drop shadow. And I'm going to cancel this, and I'm going to double click this, and I'm going to go back in here again, and again I'm going to click drop shadow, and I see there's a drop shadow here, but for some reason I just can't make these changes. Well, maybe there's a bug with the program. Maybe I need to restart my system. Maybe I need to call Adobe. Maybe I need a trip to Vietnam. I was kidding about calling Adobe. So very important step here, just because I checked it here, I have to physically, based on these choices, I have to physically select that drop shadow choice. So it's not as simple as doing this. You have to physically go and click that area. And again, it can be very frustrating if you forget to do that. So again, with this particular drop shadow, I can change the distance. So I could basically move this back to here. And I can change the angle. So I can change whether she's right or left. And I can change the opacity. So I can make it a very light shadow. Okay, and I can adjust the size of the shadow, and I can adjust the spread of the shadow, and I can adjust the distance of the shadow, how far away she's going. Now, for all practical purposes, this is going to work totally fine if, in fact, she's up against the wall. Okay, if she's up against the wall, well, this might not be a bad choice, but she's not. That's not what I'm trying to do. I want to cast a shadow back over here using her same information. Okay, so how can we do this? Well, rule number one is don't reinvent the wheel. What I mean by that is she's already there. So when you cast a shadow, the sun doesn't say, well, I'm going to make a duplicate copy of this person and cast a shadow. No, the sun casts a shadow, or the light source casts a shadow of the original image. So I already have the original image right here. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to click right here, and we're going to double click and call that body gal. Let's call this body gal DS for drop shadow. Now, of course, the drop shadow layer has to be behind her layer. Otherwise, it's not going to make a lot of sense. Make a change, save a change. Okay? Now, focus on this very intuitively. I want to cast a shadow of her selection, but I want the shadow to be in this layer, not this layer, not this layer, not this layer, this layer. So this is my target layer. In order to affect the layer, I need to select the layer. Okay, so again, my whole objective in training you guys is to understand how the software thinks. Once you start understanding how the software thinks, software is a language, and once you understand the vocab and the syntax and the verbiage and the nouns and the structure, it's very simple to start putting things together. Now, as a creative person, and I hope you are a creative person, my objective here is I don't want to interfere with your creativity, but sometimes the software gets in the way of your creativity because you're trying to be creative at the same time trying to figure out how to do something. So if you break down my experience and understand my way of teaching, I get you to think the way the software thinks. I'm not just going to say, do this, do that, do this, and you're taking notes and go, oh, my head's going to fall off my shoulders. So in order to affect this layer, I need to select this layer, which is selected. Body Gal DS for drop shadow. So I want to load her selection into this layer. How do I do that? I select the layer I want to affect, Command key click, and I've selected her. Okay, so I've selected that selection. Command key click Macintosh, Control key click for Windows. Okay, now that I have her selected, I don't want her hard edge selected. So I want to go to the select menu, and based on these choices, modify, and based on these choices, feather. And let's feather this with, say, 14 pixels. Return. Now, notice that got rid of the extra pixels down here. Now, next step is very important. I want to offset this selection. So I'm in a selection tool. Very important step. Do not be in the move tool. I don't want to be in the move tool. I need to be in a selection tool. This is a selection tool. This is a selection tool. This is a selection tool. These are 3 selection tools. It doesn't matter which one I'm in. I can now hit the arrow key to the right, and I can move my selection. And I can move it down, and I can move to the right, etc., etc. Now we want to fill the selection. We want to fill the selection with a variation of black. Now I need to get options for choices. Again, I want you to think about solving problems. Think about this intuitively. I don't want to select D for D. If I select the letter D, that's going to default to foreground, D for default. And if I hit option delete, it's going to fill that with black. I don't want to fill that with 100% black. I want to fill it with a controlled environment black, which means I need to get a dialog box. Dialog boxes is how I communicate with the software. So shift delete is the same as going to edit fill or shift F5, but I think it's simpler to do shift delete. Then, based on these choices, I want to fill this with black. And it didn't matter that black was here, by the way. So I just want to share with you a concept. If my original colors were this color and option key that color, I could still hit shift delete, and then based on these choices I can keep my color palettes here for other reasons, and I can simply come here and say black based on these choices. I want to fill this with black multiply. Now multiply is going to take the existing background, in this particular case the palm trees or the ocean or the water. It's going to multiply, it's going to blend it into this foreground color. So I'm going to use black multiply, and I'm going to go for 55%, and I'm going to hit OK. So now I can Command D deselect. Okay. Now I put that selection multiply, shift delete. So I hit shift delete, multiply at 55%. Now all is looking great, except now I have the same problem I had before with these settings. It looks like it's up against the wall. But now I can go to my move tool, V for move, and make sure I'm inside of this layer. And if you're not inside the layer, you can just command click. Right now I'm in her top layer. Command click, right now I'm in the shadow layer. Command click, right now I'm in the beach layer. It's in the move tool. So because I'm in the physical shadow layer, I can move the shadow. Now, what I want to be able to do with this shadow is Command T to transform the shadow. Okay, so I'm going to make the shadow a little smaller, and I'm going to basically hold down the Command key, and I'm going to basically skew the shadow. And I'm going to put the shadow back over to here. I'm going to take this, move this back over to here. Now this is totally arbitrary on how you want to cast the shadow. Now, since she's not a giant woman here, I'm probably not going to make her, it's not going to cast the shadow down through the horizon here. I'm probably going to make the shadow closer to her image. Now, the other thing you want to pay attention to is that technically her arm, the top of her arm doesn't exist. But this is pretty convincing. Okay? Now, so you can basically put that into place. And again, let's undo that a few times. So I simply have the shadow selected, Command T. I then have a couple of choices. I can then scale the shadow down. I can now move the shadow over, etc., etc., etc. Now we did Command Option Z with the return key. So Command Z. So Command T. I can then hold. I'm going to scale this down just a bit. Therefore, I can hold down the Command key and make a skew of the shadow. Control key for Windows, and I'm going to skew that right back to here. I'm going to skew this guy right into place here. Then I'm going to take the whole thing and just scale it down a little bit. So it doesn't look like the giant anaconda woman of the beach that's casting a shadow out to London, England. Okay, so now I can take this and move this in a little bit, and the return key. Now here's the cool part. Because it's multiplying the background, and at this point, if you want to make further changes to this, because I have the layer selected, I can just hit 5 for 55. Look what's happening over here. I didn't have to select anything. I just had two things have to happen. I have to be inside the layer, and I have to be in Move tool. If you're in your selection tool and you try that, okay. So if you're in a selection tool, but if you're in another tool like a brush tool, that right now in the brush tool and at 5 or 6 it doesn't work. Make sure you're in a selection tool, and the easiest way to just be Move tool, because that's the tool I was currently in. So because inside of that particular layer, so as an example, I was in this layer and I hit 5. It's going to make that 55%. Again, a little shortcut. I don't have to touch this. As long as I'm inside the layer, and as long as I'm inside the Move tool, I can do 0 gives me 100%. 1 gives me 10, 2 gives me 20, 30, 40. Look over here to the right. 30, 40, 50, 60. If I want to make this, I'm going to pick a number. 67%, type in 67. You want to make this 44%, type in 44. Now also, if your cursor is here, then I could hit the up arrow or the down arrow. And if I hold down the shift key, it's going to go 10-point increments. So the arrow key up, arrow key down goes in 1% increments. And if I hold down the shift key, it goes 40, 43, 53, 63. So see what's happening here. So basically you can cast more or less shadows. Make sure you hit the return key to come out of that. Make a change. Save a change. So that's probably the very, very best way to create a more convincing shadow. Now again, I would go back into quick mask mode and fix up here. The other thing I want to pay attention to is to basically, it looks like, it's not a bad representation, but the color on her, the light on her is not the same lights on the beach. So I'm going to show you some techniques of how we can fix that in our next video.